Welcome. We're very happy to have you here with us today. Thanks for joining us for one of our coffee chats. My name is Amy Klaus. I'm Marketing Manager for Early Childhood Products here at Brooks Publishing, and we're very happy to have Angi Stone-MacDonald joining us today to talk about STEM experiences for kids at home, young children at home. Before we start, I want to go over a few webinar tips. So Angie, could you move the presentation forward one slide? So just as you're listening today, it would be good to, if you have any audio issues, to switch. If you're using your computer audio, if you'll switch to using the telephone in audio, that usually helps solve some of the audio problems. You also can submit questions through the question box on your webinar panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll take those questions at the end during our live Q&A portion. And if you do have any bandwidth problems, you might want to close any other applications they're using. If you're using on your computer, it kind of help just to if you only have the GoToWebinar running, can help if you do have any connection problems. I wanted to let you know today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording as well as a link to a certificate in the follow-up email tomorrow. And the slide handouts are available in your webinar panel on your right-hand side. There's a handout section, so you can download the PDF there, and they'll also be in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Stone-MacDonald.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Angi Stone-MacDonald. I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston in early childhood and inclusive settings, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to see. So, let's see. That's the right thing. So, we're going to talk about different ways in which we can teach STEM at home, but I wanted to give you one of the ways that we like to think about it, which is around engineering design. And I know that engineering can sound really scary when we're talking about young kids and about science in general. Engineering is probably one of the more mystifying parts of STEM, but it's really thinking about it as a scientific method process. And so when we did some work around engineering design for young kids, we came up with this particular graphic that looks at 4 steps. You want to start with any kind of problem you want to solve and think about it. You want to then try it. So try something, build something, do something, and try and see if your ideas work. Then you want to fix it and figure out, okay, what worked, what didn't work, how can we adjust it? And then you want to share it and talk about it, and you can use this as a form of reflection, like in the classroom, or as a form of pride in sharing what you created and did. And when we're doing those things, we're creating and working on 5 basic thinking skills. And these thinking skills come out of the standards that we have for developmental trajectories for kids birth to 5, but also lead us into the next generation science standards and other Common Core standards. And those are really thinking about how we can be curious, how we can be flexible in our thinking, how we can be persistent, so continuing to try things, being reflective, so thinking about what works and what doesn't, and being collaborative and working together and coming up with solutions together. So that just gives you a little bit of a framework for the ideas that I'm coming to you with, and that we're thinking about these as sort of investigations and problem solving. So when we're doing STEM, we think about 2 phases of exploration. And the first phase is open exploration, where you're having those initial experiences that are building that foundation for STEM. And the other phase is focused exploration, where you're being more specific, you're answering really specific questions. And when you're at home with kids, or when you're designing activities as educators to have parents do with their kids right now, it's really important to include both open exploration and focused exploration. And with open exploration, we can think about just giving kids the tools that we would want them to use, to play with, to try and understand, to explore, to figure out how they work. And then once they kind of do that, we can go back and see, what did they learn? We can ask them questions and about what they learned, what they were most interested in, what was cool that they did, and then go back to developing some specific questions to investigate around focused exploration. And what's really, really important here, and I think important but also difficult at this time, is that when we're doing open exploration, it's about creating that environment that leads to that exploration and leads to that curiosity and persistence and reflection, and flexibility and thinking. Being collaborative is a little hard right now depending on who you're playing with. But you want to be able to create those spaces where kids have those tools that are both interesting to them, but also that they can explore and play with. So thinking about ways to use household objects that can be used in so many different ways, and not necessarily giving a child a toy that has one or two ways that it can be used, or one or two buttons you can press and then you've done it and that's it, and there's no other exploration. So you want to start by letting them explore those objects, and these can be normal household objects, and then have them come up with some questions or some things they want to know more about, or offer them some questions. So I'm going to give you some various examples of those in a minute, but because my focus has always been on how do we address STEM activities for all kids, including kids who have disabilities, in some of the work we've done previously, we came up with these Penn UDL questions. And I don't know how many people on this webinar are familiar with UDL. I'm going to assume many of you are, but for those of you who are not, it's Universal Design for Learning. And the idea is basically to find different ways to define what content we're giving kids, how we're presenting them the opportunities to learn, how we're presenting them the opportunities to show what they know or what they've accomplished, and the motivators we're giving them, how we can do those in different ways to really help all kids learn. So for STEM activities, we came up with 10 key questions. And you have a handout so you can look back at these again because they're in the PowerPoint. But one of them is just like providing different materials of the same type to really try and explore the concept. So if you're thinking about balls, you want to provide balls of different shapes, different textures, different weights, so they can really explore what happens when you use different balls. Going to persistence, we want to give them the opportunity to try different things and to repeat it many times. So if we think about the scientific method, we're thinking about that as an opportunity to just keep trying and figure out if it's happening again. If you think about a child, an infant or a toddler who's sitting in a high chair and they drop something on the floor, and the parent or caregiver picks it up and puts it back on the tray, and they drop it again. Well, why are they dropping it? Well, they're not dropping it because they're trying to annoy us. They're dropping it because they are trying to test that scientific method. Because unlike us, as adults, who understand gravity, they don't necessarily believe that every time they drop it, the same thing is going to happen. Is it really going to fall? And or when it falls, is that human that's with them going to pick it up and put it back on the tray? Is it going to find its way back up on the tray? And if it doesn't initially, what do they need to do? Do they need to cry? Do they need to laugh? So they're testing them. And so they're doing the repeated activity to see what happens because they don't believe us. You want to use more than one sense. So as we're thinking about doing different activities, Think about ways you can involve soap or shaving cream or paint or using other materials. If you have kids with sensory needs who don't like to be wet or dirty, they could do it using some kind of gloves of some kind. You can use different kinds of beans or corn or flour. They all have different textures. So using multiple senses, you can smell things. And this is all science because we're trying to solve different problems. We're trying to understand, what do we know about these different things? Are we using media to document children's learning? I feel like we're doing that a lot now because we're using our devices all the time. And then, are materials accessible? Are there scaffolds built in for kids who have mobility issues, for example? So what ways are we able to add extra pieces? One thing is, you can just, if your kids who have trouble grasping smaller items, is that you can simply wrap foam or a toilet paper roll, you can tape it to that, anything to help them grab at it better. In terms of motivation, we try and use preferred objects, reinforcers, or adults that help it. Now, obviously, one of the struggles that some people I know are having, including many of my colleagues who have children, is that they are the reinforcers for their children, but yet they have work to do as well. So we need to figure out what other preferred items or reinforcers could help. Remembering kids need to be well fed and well rested. They have appropriate communication. And we set up an environment that really lets them focus on this particular activity at this time, and they're not distracted by other things. And then we just have many different ways of figuring out, did the children learn? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In the book that we wrote, for the preschool age kids, we started with an idea around the book Muncha, Muncha, Muncha. And if you're not familiar with this book, it's about a farmer who's growing carrots in his garden, and he's trying to keep the rabbits out, and he can't quite figure out how to do that. And so one of the activities that we created was the idea of building and constructing a garden. And so this was just a simple way that we presented this activity to children, where they read the book and they tried to figure out, how could we keep the farmer's vegetables and stuff safe. And so in this particular classroom where we took these pictures, they had the green representing the grass or the ground and the different vegetables, and then they had these different blocks. We have some different pictures that have different types of blocks, but you could use just about anything to try and figure it out. And one of the cool stories that happened as we were building is the kids figured out, if we build it up high and we cover it, then the rabbits can't get to it. But then we asked them, well, what happens about the sunlight? If it's all covered, is there sunlight? Well, the sun can't get in, so then the vegetables won't grow. And so again, these are all questions that we're trying to help kids to understand better and to explore. And they can try different things, and they can come up with different ideas to see what would work with the different materials you have at home. Another common thing we do is talk about Goldilocks engineering. So Baby Bear has a lot of problems. If you go back and you think about the story of the three bears, Baby Bear has porridge that gets eaten, and it needs to be protected. Baby Bear needs a new chair because Goldilocks broke his chair, and Baby Bear needs a new bed because he doesn't want to go back in his bed after Goldilocks was there. And so what you see on the right here is just another form of that particular engineering plan for how we could solve problems. This one's a little bit more complex for slightly older kids, early elementary. But when you're doing this, you're trying to think about ways that we can solve problems. So Baby Bear has porridge. when we do this activity, we use Legos to build a cup that can be dropped from the height of a table from Legos, and we put in cotton balls. And if they can drop the Legos from the Lego cup that they made from the height of a table to the floor and it doesn't break and the little cotton balls stay inside, then they've passed. And what do they need to do? With the chair, we try and build a chair out of Legos or other things that a stuffed bear could sit in. And we do similar things with building a bed. As we try and work with older kids, so as we're getting out of that birth to 5 range, these are things we might do with 3 to 5-year-olds. As we're getting a little older, you can start to add more constraints. So, for example, if we're building Baby Bear's porridge bowl with Legos, maybe they successfully build it, but it has like 57 Legos in it. Well, then they have to be able to do it with only 30. So we start to add constraints. We start to add things that make it harder. And that's how we push the problem-solving envelope a little bit further so that they start to have to try and think through and reflect and try different things and be flexible in their thinking and go to all of that. And these are all different ideas that you can try. I know one of the concerns right now is, it's hard to get things and you have to use things that you have at home. So this is a picture that I found of a cool activity where they simply took pipe cleaners and they put pipe cleaners into a colander. And you just stick the pipe cleaners through the holes of the colander, and then they were putting beads on there and trying to see how many beads they could get, how many pipe cleaners, and then making a cool picture. Marble runs are also really fun to make. And depending on how complex we get, you could definitely do these with older kids. You could also do these depending on the kids with disabilities. You might do them with larger balls rather than marbles if they need something because they don't have the dexterity to handle the smaller marbles. These were built here with a couple different things, with toilet paper rolls, with paper plates. If you look at the one in the middle, they've cut paper towel and toilet paper rolls in half and then taped them to the wall with painter's tape. And then other ones, they're using paper plates and other things to try and make them work. But there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can also do this with Legos or with boxes or other things to try and create that height and that angle. So when we're looking at this, you want to think about different ways in your house that you can help kids do things with activities that you already have. So how could you look at the different content that you want to teach around STEM? Well, we have Legos and blocks, and so you can use lots of different types of Legos and blocks, see how they can be combined or not combined. In the bath or in sink play, you can have pumps and spray bottles and pipes and foam. I know you don't have all of these things, but you may. I've been saving used hand soap containers to have pumps and to be able to use spray bottles out of those. You have foam. I have for piping. You can't get it wet, but you could use paper towel holders, paper towel rolls, which could get a little wet, and then you could switch them out. You could use sand and dirt play if you have access to the outdoors, where you add toy construction vehicles, scoops, funnels, buckets, pulleys, all these different things. In the kitchen, there's so much you can do with pots and pans. I mentioned colanders and cups. They're been a lot of ideas around helping kids to toss things into different pans. You can see how far they can go. You have balls that are soft or smaller balls to toss them into different pans, or seeing if you can bounce them off pans and into a cup. Remember, we want to be safe, not the time to get injured. And then paper and cardboard tubes and balls and marbles. And I've seen marble runs made just with paper that's been folded and then taped together and taped onto the wall. So you can adjust this for different kids and different ages, depending on, you want to find that entry point. So what is that entry point for each of your kids, or that entry point for kids with certain disabilities who may need some additional scaffolding? And just try and figure out where they can become involved. And if you do have siblings in the home, how can you have them work together? But really focus on process and asking questions and providing those materials, and then helping them come up with cool products to take pictures of and share with their family, their teachers, or other people who might be excited. So here's some photos that I created of some different ideas. And the top middle one, just for you to see, is just a bunch of toilet paper rolls that were put into an Amazon box, and I was trying to see how many I could get in there. And with older kids, I might ask them to estimate rows and columns and guess. I might ask them to figure out what kind of configurations. And then you could use small little balls and see if they can toss them into one. And they could even have to predict which one they were going to get in, or would they get it in between some. The photo in the top left is bowling. And with the bowling, we have bowling in the top left and the top right. With each of those, there are some scaffolds there. So a softer ball that's fairly heavy for kids with disabilities. On the left, we've used some racetrack that we had sitting around to just create like some grooves. So when we rolled the bumpy ball to bowl, then it stayed on there and it didn't go off to the side. It's like creating a bumper. And that really worked. To make it more difficult, the photo on the bottom left, you can see that you're trying to roll a ball through a tube to then hit it and bowl. And then on the bottom right, you're trying to actually see how many tubes you can get one ball to go through. So the most I got it when I was trying was 3. Once I got to 4, it all just went all over the place. And then in the middle and the bottom, finally, I just tried to use paper towel and toilet paper rolls to try and build something. And I wanted to see, how high could I build? What configuration? What constraints could I put on myself to make it easier or harder? I didn't use any tape, but you could use tape or string or paper or anything else to make it more difficult. Or ways to make it easier. You could use just blocks. As I was doing this, my cats were playing with me, and I had all kinds of boxes that they like to sit in, from shoe boxes and Amazon boxes, and they were jumping from one to another. And I was thinking about how with little kids you could do some kind of obstacle course with shoe boxes and pillows and other types of things. And these would all work on STEM concepts as well as getting energy out. Sorry about that. So I hope you enjoyed some of these ideas. And I apologize, I went a little bit long. You have access to the handouts But I also have a blog, which is linked here. And that's one of the reasons that I have it here is because I did work on a video, and I'm going to be adding a video and some other resources that I have for this to the blog. And that will be up probably sometime tomorrow. So if you've watched this webinar and you have access to this, you'll be able to see a video with a few more ideas and a book idea or two and some other things that we've done in the past that you can use in addition. Thank you very much.
Great.
Amy?
Thanks so much, Angie. That was great. I have a 3-year-old at home, and I think he would really like some of those bowling and building ideas. That was great. And for those of you listening, we will include a link to Dr. Stone-MacDonald's blog in the follow-up email tomorrow. So that should come out tomorrow, about 24 hours after the event. So you'll get a link to that if you don't have a chance to write it down now. So now I want to share, we're going to be doing a giveaway of the book Engaging Young Engineers, which Dr. Stone-MacDonald was an author of. Angie, if you could just move the slides forward one, I think. There we go. So we're doing a discount on all products, so you can save 20% using the code Coffee Talk at Brooks. And then I think the next slide is our giveaway, information about our giveaway. So 3 lucky listeners are going to win a copy of Engaging Young Engineers, which has more information about STEM activities that you can do with young children. And then I wanted to let everyone know that we are doing a whole series of coffee chats. So if you're interested in listening to other coffee chats on early childhood topics, please feel free to check out our schedule and join more. And we also then have a COVID-19 resources page. We've gathered some articles and other activities that might be helpful for those of you, still working with families while children are home. If you'll go forward just one more slide, the URL, there we go. There's a bit.ly, and there's also some other webinars that are linked and some downloaded resources. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter those in the chat box now. We have some nice thank yous for the webinar. That's great. We have a comment that someone said, STEM learning is great for all ages. Inquiry-based learning is great as all kids are born to discover and explore. So definitely. Let's see. We have a question about, would you consider an open-ended art project a STEM activity, such as using a variety of materials to create Cinderella's dress for the ball or designing her golden carriage?
So yeah, I would definitely include that as a STEM activity. I think one of the ways that makes that inquiry and STEM is having her think, the little girl, I'm making an assumption, a little girl, but it could be a little boy too, who wants to create this, creating the dress, that why are they making the choices they're making? So are they making them because it's the color that they think Cinderella wears and they've got information for that? Maybe they want it to be practical. What are the different practical reasons? So part of it is an art activity can certainly be STEM if you go back and you have kids think about and try and understand why they're making the decisions they're making. I mean, when we think about any products in, products that we have in this world technology is from people doing engineering. So we have dresses, we have designs, we have fabrics and choices and stuff because people figured out how they would be useful. So I think it definitely can. And in the resources that I put up on the blog, there's actually an art activity I did for another conference that I'm going to include that is actually an art activity that is a STEM-based activity for young kids with disabilities too.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Oops, the questions are coming in, so I'm start jumping around. Is it possible to do science activities with a 1-year-old, or are they too young?
So the way I think about it is, yes, of course, you can do science with anyone. I mean, if you go back to the example I gave about the child dropping the item from the high chair, that child is doing science. And my husband and I joke all the time that our cats are doing science because they're trying to figure out how to get into the cabinet. They're trying to figure out how to get into stuff. They knock things over. All of this is actually science. They're trying to figure it out. And a 1-year-old can. If you look in our book, you're one of our lucky winners, you'll notice that we talk about precursor skills. So curiosity and flexibility and these things. So like playing peekaboo is actually a really great way to teach some of those curiosity skills because we're teaching about, whether object permanence, we're teaching about being curious to try and figure out where it came from. Can they figure out what's under there? What can they remember that works on cognitive load? So yeah, I mean, you can do them with 1-year-olds. There's lots of different things, and anything you're giving them to explore, really they're doing science.
Great. We're getting lots of thank yous and lots of messages that it's great that you included activities that people have in their houses. That's good. We have a listener asked, have you heard of the new term STREAM? So STREAM, adding R for resilience. She just learned it this week.
I have heard it. I don't want to say that I could speak to it, although I think that it's probably resilience is something that's probably going to become really important now with all of the trauma that I think a lot of people are facing. I do think that helping kids to be problem solvers and to think through things logically in terms of how they solve it is going to help with resilience in general, but I can't really speak to the term stream. I know STEAM adds the A with the arts, which is definitely important, because I've also heard stream with the R being reading. And so obviously that adds the literacy component.
That sort of ties into another question we got. Is it possible to involve children using other subjects with engineering, such as music or mathematics?
Definitely. So in a lot of the things that we do, with teaching, I teach teachers who are going to teach young kids. We include math in everything. So we tend to do a lot of problem-based learning that includes math, that includes art. It can include music. I mean, music is in effect a mathematical language in many ways in terms of how it works. And you can definitely include music in there and trying to get kids to understand music. I mean, I think when I learned music initially, I remember I had to learn how to read music when I was pretty young because I had a teacher that insisted on that. And I learned to read it in a very basic way, not because I could actually hear. I couldn't hear the sounds and connect them. So yeah, I mean, I think you can include any of it as long, and there's some really interesting studies that have come out actually with individuals who are blind, where they actually use vibrations, and with people who are deaf and people who are blind, so they use vibrations and then they use color to try and understand and experience music in different ways, and it's done in a very scientific way. So it's interesting.
Great. For those of you listening, there will be a recording. We're making a recording right now, and it'll be in tomorrow's follow-up email. There'll be a link to view the recording, and there also will be a link to a certificate in that follow-up email as well. We had a question from a listener. What prompted you to study STEM?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think when I started as a professor, I had lots of different interests, but I think my focus has really always been on really inclusive education. And one of the areas that I saw when I was working was that science was not an area that kids often got included who had disabilities, because there was the belief that they can't do STEM because that's too difficult for them, or young kids can't do STEM because they're not cognitively there yet. And I didn't think that was right. I thought it was important to be able to try and make STEM really accessible for everyone, whether that be children, kids with disabilities, girls, kids from underrepresented individuals from underrepresented groups. Like everyone can do STEM and can be great at it because we can all solve problems.
Let's see. So when you're introducing an activity to the little kids, do you tell them that they're learning through play before they begin, or do you kind of mention what was learned after the activity?
So when we're starting with little kids, with real little kids, what we might talk about is that, today we're going to look at some toilet paper rolls, or we're going to look at these materials in front of you, and we're going to see what kind of really cool things we can do with them. What can we build with them? What can we make with them? And I just want you to go out there and have as much fun as possible. And we might start with that idea. And then after they build things and do things, then we would do more of explaining how it is that they're doing science and reinforcing that they're scientists. But part of the idea is that you don't want to make them only think they can do things in certain ways. And I think that's been one of the issues with kids of all ages, is that we think, well, you can only use your pen in one way. And while there's an easier way to use your pen to actually write, in general, we don't want to say, well, this is the only thing you can do with a pen, because you could actually, I could use a pen to roll my hair up and hold my hair in place, even though that's not the intended purpose. And there was a really interesting study done, I can't remember who did it, but several years ago, where they found that if you put a toy that had, say, 7 or 8 different things that it would do in front of children, if the adults showed them how to do 1 or 2 things, those are the only things that the kids would do. But if you just let them explore it, they would find all 7 or 8 things that they did. And so I think kids are much more creative, but yet they see us as role models. And so if we only show them certain things, those are the things they're going to do.
Very true. I can see that. Do you have ideas for STEM activities to use during cooking prep with a parent or during other routine like cleaning tasks, laundry, or cleaning around the house?
So laundry is could be really simple. One is like sorting by color, sorting by size, sorting by shape, or even sorting clothes that, like, if the kids are able to identify, is this mommies, or is this daddies, or is this brothers, or is this sisters, they can sort that way. But those sorting and classifying is one of those prerequisite skills that kids need to work on. And that's also math focused. And so you have that. With cooking, identifying solids and liquids, in terms of, like, if you're making a cookie batter, for example, you have solids, you have liquids, trying to understand dissolving, how things dissolve or how things mix together, mixtures. That's all STEM. Measuring any of that stuff, bigger, smaller, understanding conservation of volume, so different size containers, but they hold the same amount. All of that stuff is really cool ways to do it. And as long as kids are just having fun and you're asking them questions, then they're doing STEM.
We have a comment from a listener and a question added in. So I find that parents often teach their children to use items in only one way. Any suggestions to help parents facilitate creative thinking or open-ended play?
So I think one of the ways, I worked a lot with early interventionists. We do a lot of home visiting and parent coaching, and a lot of the ways that we try and get parents to do that is by saying, let's put an item down on the floor in front of a child and just let them explore. And I think as parents start to see, and maybe using videos of different ways you can use things, one is like letting the child just explore. If parents see that their kid may do something totally different with it, which is not what we thought, they may be more open to different ways of doing it. but also trying to encourage parents that, especially with young kids, that they're not going to necessarily use the toys in the way we think. If they pick up your phone, for example, a 2-year-old is just as likely to think it's something they can bang on the table as they are to think that it's a phone that has a fun game they can play on it or something like that. And that's not because they want to break the phone. It's because they just don't necessarily recognize that that's the thing you want and you don't want your phone broken. But if you give, but they're just exploring. Again, they're doing that science because they don't necessarily know what will happen if they bang your phone on the table. And so that's where you want to try and offer parents ideas for objects that kids can explore, that it doesn't matter if they break or can't be broken.
Yes. Let's see. So we have a comment that it seems like a lot of the younger STEM activities also work on building vocabulary for stronger language, which leads to stronger literacy down the road.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And that's one of the pieces about when I'm teaching my pre-service teachers and pre-service early interventionists, is that if they're doing the exploration in the STEM, part of how we build that vocabulary is, we may say, oh, I'm looking at, they're hitting their phone. Oh, I see you're hitting this. I see you're hitting and banging. It's making loud noise. You're narrating for them those ideas, and that's giving them language that they don't have. And the richer and the more expressive the language is that you can narrate, and then you can ask them questions to try and let them use those words, the more likely they are to build that language and richer vocabulary.
We have two questions about whether you have any recommendations for middle schoolers or adolescents for
Oh boy.
activities.
So that is definitely not my area, but I would say that, well, I'll always recommend Legos because I personally love Legos, but I know you may or may not have those. There are a lot of free coding. I know we may or may not want kids on screens, but if you do have kids who might be interested in that, there's tons of free coding stuff out there. Let's see. That's not really my area. I apologize, but there's lots of cool robotics and stuff, and you can get those from Amazon. I'm not going to say they're cheap, but there's tons of neat robotics kits and building kits out there that I think would be fun with middle schoolers.
Okay, so we're going to take just one or two more questions before we finish up here, but there's one question. Do you have a recommendation for getting teachers in preschools to focus more on STEM activities versus focusing more on rote skills for kindergarten?
So I think one of the ways that we've been more successful in that is by introducing problem-based learning. So have them come up with something that is a project. So thinking about it like maybe the kids want to build a post office and they want to do everything around the post office. What needs to be done in the post office? Who are the workers? What is the system to sort the mail? So you have a project, and you can do something that's more building based, like building, a spaceship to go to outer space or something like that, or you could do something more like a post office. And by having a project and then going through and figuring out what skills can you address within that project that are those typical skills, how are we going to get kids to do those things? I know that that's a hard shift for a lot of teachers because they feel so much pressure to do those, we need to do skill and drill on phonics and on math facts and all of that. But, when they're trying to figure out how to, if we're trying to build something, if we're trying to build a log cabin and we're using Lincoln Logs, I don't know how many people on this call remember Lincoln Logs, but I hear you can still buy them at Target. But, if you're trying to build a cabin with Lincoln Logs, you have to know how many Lincoln logs tall and how many Lincoln logs wide. Well, you're still doing math. And then you have to have somebody who's going to sort out and count out in groups how many you need. And so all of that is math that you're doing. But I think having a project and then demonstrating it and maybe modeling it for them, if you can somehow find a way to model it. And I put my email on there. If anybody wants to reach out to me for some specific project or inquiry-based ideas, we have a lot of stuff. And if the person or people who asked about middle school ideas, I have colleagues who do a lot with middle school, and so I can connect you with them for some ideas too.
Great, thank you. One listener wrote in that they wanted to share with other listeners that Kiwi Company is an organization based on STEM, and Kiwi's KIWI. So they have resources for children two up to 13 plus. So that could be something else to check out.
That's a good resource. The other one I did find, because I ordered for a friend of mine for her kids, they have Magic School Bus. So again, I feel like stuff from my era of growing up, but they have like different kits you can order on Amazon. I ordered an engineering kit that did like electricity and magnets for her kids, my friend's kids who were 4 to 7. And they're not necessarily cheap. So I will, I think this one was about $40. But they're not household items. But if you have that ability and you have parents who are interested in that, those are also really cool kits. And my friend's kids loved it. And it lasted them probably 4 weeks of different activities.
Oh, that's a lot. And also we're hearing that Kodo Kids also has good STEM materials. So check them out. We'll take just one last question here before we sign off. Do you think preschoolers can be introduced to coding that young?
I think they can, and I've seen some examples of really good coding apps. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but if somebody emails me or you search for them, there are a lot of good coding apps. I know through Khan Academy you can find them. I think they can. One of the kinds that I like the best, but again, it does cost a little bit of money, is you can get little kits where they can code onto a device and then it makes a car or something else move. I think those are better for preschoolers because there's a tangible aspect to them compared to having them code something that then on the screen moves and is a little more abstract.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Angie, so much for sharing information. I know this was really helpful to a lot of listeners, so that's great.
Well, thank you. And it was a lot of fun for me. And thank you, everyone, for the kind comments. And I'm happy to connect with anybody. And like I said, I'll have some extra resources up on my blog tomorrow for you.
And the link to the blog will be in your follow-up email tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye all.
Thank you. Bye.